The first part of the program will actually begin with Ms. Betty Reid Soskin, and she's going to read from her biography and book. So that will be the first 15 to 20 minutes, followed by a panel Q&A session and discussion with the mayor. So you'll see both of them up here discussing an engaging session. And then we'll open the last part of the program for the audience, a question and answer. And speaking of the question and answer part, we just wanted to that there's not going to be enough time to get to all the questions, but if Andrea and Luis can raise your hands really quick, if you see them around, they have little question cards, so if you're interested, please flag them down and they'll give you a note card and a pen and they'll take it from you, so that way we can try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the program. And then following that, if you didn't know already, there is a book sale going on, so if you guys want her autobiography, you can purchase it right up front, and then there'll be a book signing at the end, briefly following. So with that, do I have any questions? No? In that case, I would like to now formally introduce our mayor so she can get us started. Thank you.
Good evening. I have some prepared remarks, but I will introduce Betty with those later. I just wanted to tell you how this came about. I was actually at an award dinner for something, but also Betty was getting an award. And I got to talking to this woman at my table, and she was so interesting, and she was telling me just little bits and pieces about her history. And I thought, wow, this woman has a story to tell. And so I thought she is just perfect for somebody that we want in San Leandro to come and just talk to us. And it's an informal place, you can see, but it's really just talking about the incredible history. I mean, I have a million questions, so I'm going to try to just limit mine to some small ones so we make sure that the audience gets to ask. But can you imagine being alive almost 100 years and seeing the ebbs and flows of things? And to me, it's just fascinating. But with that, I want to say, Betty Charbonnet Reid Soskin is much more than her title. She's also an author, composer, singer, entrepreneur, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and soon you'll see that she's also a fantastic public speaker. Betty was born into a Cajun, Creole African-American family in 1921. You can do the math. And where she spent her early years in New Orleans and the era of the lynchings and the Jim Crow segregation. So what we have here now in the Bay Area is maybe a little bit more progressive, but what we have in our national politics is not. And to me, the question of how you adapt or survive into a place that really has a lot of respect for people sometimes if you're the right color, and maybe not so much respect if you're not. And that's part of the things that I just really want to hear. Part of this conversation that San Leandro wants to hear. San Leandro is a really neighborhood where kindness matters, and it's also a really accepting, welcoming place. And so we're really just interested in hearing your story. Betty Reid also is, I don't want to say you're the oldest National Park Ranger, but I would imagine that you are the oldest. She still is an active worker in the National Park Service. She is at the Rosie the Riveter display in Richmond, and she works on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, if I recall. And next week, I don't know if she's going to tell you this, but she was chosen as one of Glamour magazine's, I don't know what the official title is, but she's going to a shoot next week in New York with Kamala Harris and a lot of different people. And so, what a life she's lived. So with that, and without further ado, I'd really like to have you welcome Ms. Betty Reid Soskin.
Very much. I think this is my speech. Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
It is so great to be here. I grew up not too far from here. I graduated California High School. 1938. And I never expected that my life would end up the the way it seems to be doing so. But I'd like to read from my first and probably last book. It's a chapter 5 called Breaking Down, Breaking Up. I guess Dorian was 2 or 3 years old when I began my composing and singing. That came out of a mental breakdown, out of getting so needful that I came to the place where the internal artist trapped inside was able to emerge from me as a way of salvation. That part of me is only known by the people that I interacted with in the Mount Diablo community. My Oakland, Berkeley urban world, the traditional, largely Creole world that I grew up in, never knew me as a writer, singer at all. And the people I came back to when I came back to Berkeley, the world of the University of California, the world of political activism that grew from my years as proprietor of Reid's Records, didn't know me in my singing or composing life either. But during those years in Walnut Creek, I performed a number of concerts in a number of colleges. I was not quite admitting that I was doing this. I was Betty Reid, who was willing to sing for you, but I didn't want to be a singer. Just a Betty who sang. And composing was very private, very personal. A way of getting outside of myself to where I could gain the perspective to see the things that were happening inside of me. It was. I tucked all of that away after I came back into Berkeley in the early 70s. While organizing my files recently, I discovered notes for an incompleted song called Meditation, which I composed while ironing in 1961. In one of those troubled days in our house in Walnut Creek. The sun glows within me, the wind sings my song, the ebb and the flow of the tides mark my cycle of being. A woman am I, and the day of my dawning is now. I hold deep within me the buds of the flowers of creation. Their blooms color all I behold. With man I have moved throughout time round this garden of being. A woman am I, and the day of my dawning is now. I carry within me the kings, queens, and slaves of the ages. I've havened the dreams of the poets and painters and pages. I've born, nurtured, buried the young ones destroyed by man's rages. A woman am I, and the day of my dawning is now. The date on these notes places their origin long before the women's liberation movement became an irresistible force for change. Prophetic? Maybe. I can only imagine very young Betty standing over that ironing board on a blazingly hot day, dreaming huge dreams of power and rebellion, and starved for freedom from a life with no access to the depths of herself. Trying terribly hard to fulfill the expectations of marriage and motherhood. I can't remember the time of day or what caused such a sense of determination and defiance. It must have been an epiphany that heralded a major life change. If I recall correctly, this preceded the beginnings of what will later be diagnosed as a period of psychosis. And looking back through a lens imbued with the wisdom of accumulated years, I now know that this was surely an unfortunate misdiagnosis. It did not take into account the impossibility of being sane in a world gone mad. I was a lonely young mother in a failing marriage with a troubled adolescent son, struggling with his sexual orientation, with 2 little boys battling valiantly against racism in an all-white world in the suburbs, having to deal daily with rejection, from an irrational, hostile community because of their skin color, and just beginning to come to terms with the growing certainty that my beautiful 3-year-old daughter had been born brain damaged and would need a lifetime of constant care. I'm certain now that what was seen as a mental breakdown was an appropriate response to an impossible set of life circumstances. The mind finds ways to protect itself from what it cannot process. Mine did it through art and music. What could have been more fitting? I was able to move past that crisis and survive. I apparently used it well under the care of a sensitive and caring Jungian psychiatrist who, after months of reassembling my psyche, was able to broaden my understanding of what normal meant sufficiently to include myself with little alteration. No small feat that. He gave me the strength to be centered, to stand pat, and to let the world adjust to me, I suppose. And I think that I'm still doing now, even as we speak. Once full recognition of the bizarre reality in which I was living hit, my therapy was over and my real life began. I was not mad. The world was. The serious business of learning to live with and not deny my madness made survival possible and does to this day. I understand now that the strident lyrics of my song, Meditation, must have come to the point where I was still searching hungrily for strength from outside myself. I was still without a sense of having control over my own destiny, still looking for my man to deliver completion. For all the brave words in this anthem of defiance, I was still a very lost young woman screaming for self-definition. I was forced to do that in the midst of also learning the hard lessons of racism and irrational societal rejection, all while trying to meet the challenges of motherhood. The convergence of traumatic events was devastating and had to be vented somehow. Had I not found a way to express the pain, my personality might have splintered hopelessly. I had to find a way to travel great distances in such a way that my brain-damaged 3-year-old could cling to my skirt and not become lost. The only possible escape was to move ever deeper into myself. By virtue of hindsight, I'm beginning to see that the mental break may have marked the point where I came to terms with the fact that the source of all power is internal, where I stopped looking for completion from outside myself. This may have been the place where I grew up, so to speak. This may have been the place where the idealist and deeply knowing little girl of 6 reappeared, disguised as psychosis, and took over control, eventually. She had survived into the 1960s, a childhood lived in a poor but proud Black family during the uncertainty of the Great Depression, an adolescence supported by 2 or 3 imaginative and caring school teachers, and those few remnants of her were still there to save me when the persona that I'd so carefully created to cope gave way. She was the one with the magic and the ability to survive. I truly believe, and she still is. It was at the age of 7 that my first communion training took over and all power was relegated to God. This is undoubtedly where the quiet acceptance of male dominance emerged, where I dared not ever even think that a lowly little girl could create anything of note. After all, creating was the province of the Almighty. The concept of divine intervention worked against my need to claim my own edges, to know what I could and could not control, create, or define. I'd grown painfully into the ability to assume personal responsibility for my own life. I'd grown out of orthodoxy and into I knew not what, but whatever it was mine. Maybe I was finally ready to accept the possibility that I was part of a random universe careening through space on a planet called Earth with no one at the helm. No small feedback. That act of acceptance. I don't think it was really that simple. Could be. For all those reasons and more, I shut that little girl down early in life, though she surely remained in the subconscious, and learned to sing as the St. Vincent Millay's poetry in secret behind the garage at the age of 11, and to read Maxwell Anderson, and to cry with Mary Aunley in Winterset, and to pretend the world of Camelot into being when the real world became too painful. I probably shared all of that as sins to Father Kelly in the confessional on some misguided Saturday afternoon before receiving Sunday morning communion. What foolishness. How on earth is a child to know? The fact is, I suffered a mental break that may have saved my life.
All these adjustments. So that was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, sometimes you think about your life and how different parts of your life make you what you are today. And that certainly is a lot of what you read there. And so, yeah, it really makes a big difference. It seems like you've really lived, one of my first question is you've lived through so much history, and you know, you've been directly involved in various movements, civil rights movements, and the movement to end the Vietnam War, a lot of protests, a lot of different things in our United States. And I'm just wondering what your view of all that is.
I think the best way to answer that is that at 97, I lived past my sense of future. That I've outlived most of my peer group. I don't have any models anymore. All the naysayers I've outlived. I'm involved in ceremony improvisation. I just make it up as I go along. But what I've gotten in its place is a stronger, enhanced sense of past. All those patterns that I can now see looking back were not visible to me in moving forward. And now I know that these periods of chaos are cyclical, that they've been happening since 1776. That we're in another one of those now. And that the one that I remember most clearly is that of the 60s, because that came midlife for me at a time when I could get a glimpse at my maturity. It also now looks to me that I am living now in the future that, along with millions of others, I helped to create in the 60s. That's an amazing thing. That now we are in the process of creating that future that your children and grandchildren are going to live into.
Thank you. some of these are about accomplishments. If you think back, I think your book hit on it a little bit about what your greatest accomplishment. There's things that you are personally inside proud of. I know, I mean, if we're talking about me, things that I personally feel is an accomplishment for me, and then there's those things that people bestow on you that are accomplishments. What do you think about when you think about your accomplishments?
Oh God, I would answer that so differently at different times in my life. At this point, I think the most prominent thing for me is the fact that I have had the privilege of helping to shape a national park. How many people can say that? And that is probably, I find myself living in a place now where I'm using everything I've ever learned. I'm being all the women that I ever was through all of those decades. And that's nothing you can prepare for. It's nothing you can anticipate. It's only when I'm in these years, this last decade, because that's obviously my last decade, that I have a sense that in tiny ways, what I have done or failed to do in any 1 hour of any one day helped to create the future. And that's what history is. But you're not aware of it when you're going through it. And I wish I had some preparation for that.
I agree. And yeah, it must be fantastic to know that, you know, these feelings inside, and then this national park that you helped create is a park about women and strength and so forth. It really means a lot.
I think that we tend, that maybe the greatest gift that I was able to give was the fact that the park that I was created with, but that I was invited to participate in planning on, was well worth doing. That feminist story of Rosie the River is really enviable. I mean, that really was the beginnings of women's emancipation into non-traditional labor for the first time, and is a really important story. But it's not the full story of the home front. Mm-hmm. And that when you give up your complexity, you sacrifice much of your truth. Mm-hmm. And that same story, that was the story of Rosie the Riveter, was also the story of 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans being interned. People who lost 2.5 years of their lives and much of their treasure, as it turned out, simply because they looked like the enemy. There was never a single case of any kind of hostility proven against any single one of them. There's also that story of great explosion of Port Chicago, where there were 2 ships that were vaporized, the loss of 320 lives, 202 of them being black-dot workers. The mutiny trials that followed because 50 of those men refused to go back and load those ships again because nobody could explain why those ships had exploded. The only time in history that we tried 50 people in a single trial and found them all guilty and sentenced 8 to 15 years in prison because they refused to obey an order during wartime. There are so many stories of the home front. And by having been able to expand that story so it became inclusive was an amazing feat for me. And that's really the gift that I think I will have.
When you're saying, you know, all that you've lived through, all the things you've experienced, I read the other day, and maybe it's false news or fake news or whatever you want to call it, but I really doubt it, in Ford County, Kansas, that there's 16,000 people that vote in one precinct house. And unfortunately, they had some road work, so they had to move it a mile out of town with no bus service. Those kinds of things, rip your soul. How do you overcome that and keep going and get hope for the next cause or for the next chapter?
I think that that's a very complex question for me, because I think that the problem is really that only 17% of those between the ages of 18 and 29 bothered to vote in the last election. There's the problem of voter suppression, but there's also the problem of voter apathy. And I don't know which of those carries the most weight. I really don't. 61% of us over 50 did vote. We were opting for yesterday rather than planning for tomorrow. We have a constitutionally protected right to be wrong. Constitutionally protected right to be bigots if that's what we want to be. I don't know how I feel about that. I think that the fact that voter suppression is an honest problem, and we have to confront it. But the fact that only 39% of us bothered to vote 4 years ago in the general election, which was predictive of the 50% that turned out for this most recent election, that is a problem. We've got lots of work to do.
We invited Betty here to be our get out the vote person. With that in mind, I mean, that's really, we have to take that to heart. And then just, what do you suggest for people? I was interested in listening to part of your, growing up in Berkeley and so forth. Were you ever part of any protests, or did you ever organize yourself or anything like that? So that was not part of you then?
No. I think I always met life depending upon what rose up in front of me. I was never a part of any organized body. In looking back, people call that activism, and I will accept that. But at the time, I didn't feel like I was being active. I was meeting life as it came at me. And I've done that ever since. I'm not even, I can't even claim to be a member of any group now. And I'm not sure that's the way people should live. It's simply that I had 4 children. I had a complicated life. The time to come up to meet life simply wasn't there except at the individual level for me. But I did that.
So when did you decide to get into the National Park Service? I mean, that...
I didn't decide to do that. I lived my entire life in a constant state of surprise. I really and truly had gone into Richmond as a field representative for a member of the California State Assembly. I was working with Dion Erner. And when Dion term limited out, I stayed on as the field representative for her successor, Lonnie Hancock. And as such, the park was created in our assembly district. And I attended those early meetings to report back to our assemblywoman and our field staff. And gradually became involved with the national parks and stopped working for the state and became consultant to the planners of the parks when I found it was not being inclusive. And that morphed into my becoming a park ranger at the age of 85.
Very true. So I imagine we have some, I'm kind of taking all the time with my personal questions, so.
Are there any cards that I didn't collect? Questions?
Yeah.
We haven't written cards.
No other comments? So the first one, and I think this is such an important question. What gives you hope today? What things make you hopeful?
I think that I am hopeful because I see those periods of chaos I see those as the times in which democracy is being redefined. And when we have access to the reset buttons. And each time one of those periods comes up, that's when the leaps in social change become possible. And I see us in another one of those right now. When the Tiki Parade was going through Charlottesville, I'm sure everyone was feeling really down. And I was feeling elated. Because I saw that as hope. Because what I could see throughout my childhood and adolescence, and through my children's childhood and adolescence, that we were being victims of domestic terrorism, but that no one around me could see that. But here they were, the hoods were off. Everything was out there in the open. Nobody could deny it anymore. And now we could get at it. And I really felt there was hope in the fact that the entire nation was seeing what I was seeing. And I really do feel that we are in a period where we can redefine democracy. And when I sit here, because I have gone through doing talks at Silicon Valley, I do talks at Google, and at Facebook, and at what? Pixar, and Nike, and you step into the world of people under 80, and you're in a different reality. They are living in a world that we're still reaching for. They have assumed so much of the changes that we're still trying to sneak up on. And that's where the hope for me was. It's an amazing, amazing opportunity to visit that world, and I've been able to visit it on a number of occasions. Only a couple of weeks ago, I did one of the Facebook Live interviews with Sheryl Sandberg to their 30,000 employees throughout the world. That world, all those things which we are still reaching for, a lot of it has already been solved. I wish we could all have that experience. Does that make any sense to anybody but me?
No, I mean, when you think about it, you were here before TV, and now we're watching TV in our hand.
And not only that, I'm listening. One of the films, there's a couple of films being made about me, and a couple of filmmakers have digitized my music, which has been lying around in tapes for 40 years. I've never even heard them until recently. But they digitized those songs. And now I am sitting with my cell phone up to my ear, listening to myself 40 years ago. And I find myself competing with my younger self. So amazing.
It's very amazing, you're right. To that note, we have one question that says, do you have any idea when your book will be available at Kindle?
Well, I think it's already, there is, well, I spent last 2 days of this last week and this coming Monday on the audio book in the studio. So that will be, I don't know how long that takes to process. I think that the ebook's already available.
It is, I have it.
So that's a positive. And then this question, it says, in the era of Trump and Me Too, would you say women and minorities need to find an alternative direction, a way to have a mental break from being dutiful followers and honor or harassed leaders and maligned women? And how do you begin to survive the
I
way you
think
have?
that process is already operating. I think that women are being heard finally. I think that they're stepping up, we're finding our voices. I think that's already out there. So much of it is already in change. If I want to see what the world's going to be like tomorrow, I cross town and go into a poetry jam and sit with the kids under 20. And all that stuff's already changed.
have some more, if any other questions, but one of the things that I heard a little bit about, and I saw it on the, I guess, the internet, about your trip next week. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That seems like such a fun thing to do.
Well, on the 10th, I will be getting on a plane to go to New York to be one of Glamour Magazine's 10 Women of the Year. On the night before, and the stylist has already called to ask what kind of dress I want to wear. Then on the 12th, there's a huge event where we will be, they have developed videos on each of us that will be played before an audience and will be presented there in New York. And then on the 13th, I will be speaking at SUNY, New York City and College. And on the 14th, I will be appearing in a small theater off Broadway that's giving the life of Gloria Steinem. And the first act is on Gloria's life, and the second act is an audience participation act, and I'm in that. So that's what next week looks like for me. Wow. All that in 97.
Boy, so you have 4 children.
Well, my kids are all eligible for AARP.
And then grandchildren
And great.
and great-grandchildren. Boy, that's such a connection. I mean, just thinking about
The magic is that my great-grandmother was born into slavery in 1846 in St. James Parish, Louisiana, and lived to be 102, not dying until 1948, 3 years after I had that experience in the Jim Crow Union Hall. And that my mother, who was raised by my great-grandmother, was born in 1894 and lived to be 101. And I was born in 1921 and celebrated my 97th birthday just about a month ago. But the 3 of us were all adults at the same time. I was 27 years old, married, and a mother when my slave ancestor died. I knew her as the matriarch of my family. And on January 20th of 2009, I'm a seated guest on the Capitol Mall, witnessing the inauguration of America's first African-American president, with a picture of my great-grandmother in my breast pocket, in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial. Lincoln, whose life was contemporary with the life of my great-grandmother, because that's how fast the time goes.
Okay, so we have probably about another 5 minutes. Is there a question that somebody else would like to ask? Okay, okay, we got there.
If there's something else that you could accomplish in your life, or that you could see accomplished within your lifetime, what would it be?